Hi everyone, how are you doing? I'm okay. Things have been going all right recently, though I found my sense of time recently has got so messed up. And I guess this experience of people that if you just stay at home and go out as little as possible, that time seems to move very rapidly because we don't have those sort of markers of big events or things to distinguish between one time and another. So I feel like in my head it's all just like blurring together. It's a very weird sensation. Like, has anybody else been having that as well? It's very strange. So I have a number of new books that I want to talk to you about that I'm excited to read. The first is a very special edition of a very special book, which is Oscar Wilde's De Profundis. Folio Society have just put out this new edition of it, and the Folio Society books are always really beautiful. So it comes in this slipcover, of course, and then it comes out, and it's just so yeah, their books are just so beautifully done. I love how austere and important they always look, and this edition comes with a new introduction by Patti Smith. And it's a really like heartfelt, moving introduction that she gives. So if any of you that don't know, De Profundis is a letter that Oscar Wilde wrote to his lover Bosie while he was in prison, while Oscar Wilde was in prison in 1897. So he wrote this towards the end of his 2-year prison sentence after he was tried for sodomy and indecent exposure, and so he had a very long, hard time in prison where he was meant to do hard labor, and and towards the end he was allowed to write a letter, and because I think the prison officer thought this was a way that he could sort of exercise his mind in a healthy way. So he wrote this very moving letter to his lover Bosie. So the first part of the letter covers their relationship with each other, and then the second part is more about Oscar Wilde's sort of spiritual meditations about life and bigger issues to do with that. And it was published, I think, 5 years after he died. And it's really moving how Patti Smith talks about her connection with this letter and Oscar Wilde himself over more than a century, and how sort of meditating on his experience and how it compares to hers, it's really well done. And I think about it too because a number of years ago there was an exhibition at Tate Britain which was sort of about queer history, and one of the things they had in this exhibit was the actual prison door from Oscar Wilde's prison cell, and it was amazing just standing there looking at this door and knowing that Oscar Wilde had just been facing it for 2 years of his life, and what that did to him, and how it sort of broke his spirit in some ways. And so this is a very important artifact from, I think, like queer history, and so it's great that it's been done in this beautiful new edition, and it has photographs throughout. So there's photographs of Oscar with Bosie, and it's just really beautifully done. So that's a really lovely new book to have in my collection, and also I don't know if I've ever showed this before, but Oscar Wilde related. I have this notebook that a friend gave me as a present a number of years ago, which is the actual notebook with blank pages, but it also has the entire text of the portrait of Dorian Gray within it. So I don't know if you'll be able to see it because it's very, very small. But you can see the text there. It is very tiny throughout, but it's meant to simulate the lines of a notebook, and then you're meant to write in between the lines of Wilde's great novel. And I've never written in it because I've been too like intimidated to, because think like what I'm writing is going in between what Oscar Wilde wrote. It's just sort of like too intimidating and crazy. Nevertheless, this is a really lovely thing that I like to have on my desk. Pew by Catherine Lacey, which is a great title for a novel. So this is a novel about a small town in America where a child is found sleeping on a pew in a church, and the child can't remember where they came from or anything about their origins or their story. So the townspeople sort of take the child in to take care of them, but they're not sure about the child's race or even the child's gender, and this becomes a point of contention between all the villagers who feel very uncomfortable with that and want to define the child in some way. And yeah, and I like that concept. And the author Daisy Johnson praises this novel as well, saying, "I consumed it. It is the electric charge we need." The Rabbit Queen by Dexter Palmer. I've been sent this really beautiful proof of the novel, and Dexter Palmer is an author that I've always wanted to read and been really interested in reading, but yeah, I've never got around to reading. So yeah, I'm hoping to read this because I love the sound of the premise of this novel. So in 1726 in America, a woman in a village who's a farmer's wife gives birth to a dead rabbit, and the story follows a doctor and his apprentice as they examine this woman, and they have very logical frames of mind. So they're like, how could this have occurred? Why is this happening? But yeah, it seems to defy all logic, and it becomes a big sensational news story. And so yeah, it follows the story of that journey and this woman named Mary Toft, who is giving birth to dead rabbits, and it's based on a real historical incident. So yeah, very curious story. Miss Iceland by Audur Eva Olafsdottir. This is a novel about a young woman who is an aspiring writer and in Iceland, and I think it takes place somewhere between like the mid and late 20th century, because it references in the description like JFK being assassinated and stuff. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly when it takes place, but so she's an aspiring writer, and so she moves to Reykjavik to try to become a writer. But at that time, it was very difficult for a female writer to get herself known and get published. And also in Iceland, there's a huge amount of writers. Iceland has more writers per capita than anywhere else in the world. And so she moves to Reykjavik, and she moves in with a gay man who is wants to work in the theater, but isn't able to find a job doing that, and so has to work on a fishing boat. And so I think it's about young people who have to make compromises in that way while trying to live out their dreams. And so I think she aspires to move away to realize her dream of becoming a writer. The Cat in the City by Nick Bradley, which has a really lovely cover. And so this is about a cat in Tokyo that moves amongst several different people, and so it touches upon the lives of these different characters and how they interlink with each other over the course of time. And yeah, so I think that's a really lovely way to make a group of like interconnected short stories by following a cat in this way. And Nick Bradley actually he studied creative writing at the University of East Anglia, which is the university I went to as well, and has a very famous writing program. And he actually studied the history of cats' appearances in Japanese literature, so he knows the subject very well. And the author Rowan Hisio Buchanan calls this a love letter to Japan and its literature. The Yellow House by Sarah M. Broom. So this nonfiction book that won the National Book Award last year in America, but it's only just been published in the UK now, and I've been so excited to read this book because it was at the top of some of the best books of last year of many different people's lists. So it's one that I've been really wanting to get to and was thinking about ordering from America for some time, but now it's been published in the UK. Yay! So I can read it here. But yeah, it sounds like a really interesting, harrowing story where the author follows the history of her family over the past 100 years in New Orleans, and so follows the story of her family through Hurricane Katrina and a number of different events. And yeah, it just sounds very good, so I'm very eager to read this. Minor Detail by Adania Shibli. This is a novel about a war crime that takes place in 1948, wherein Israeli soldiers rape and murder a Palestinian woman in the desert and bury her there. And then 50 years later, a woman researches this crime and becomes slightly obsessed with it, and her connections with this woman who was violated and killed in this way. And so yeah, follows the story of this like linking of these two women over the course of a century and over this horrific crime. I've heard from people who've read it that it's a very moving and powerful novel. The Anthill by Julianne Pachico. This is a debut novel by an author I've read before. She published a book of short stories called The Lucky Ones, and I really enjoyed a number of those short stories. So quite curious to see what her first novel is like. And this is a novel about a woman who moves back to Colombia after living in England for 20 years. So she moved to England when she was only 8 years old, and after the death of her mother. And yeah, so it's about her process of going back to the country she was born in and reconnecting with people from her childhood who have very different memories and thoughts on the experiences of her childhood than she does in her own subjective memories. So I think it's about the formation of identity and yeah, how we form this idea of ourselves like that. So yeah, very curious about this. And finally, I have two novels by authors I've read before and really loved their previous books, and I think they're two of the most exciting authors working today. And both happen to have written dystopian novels. So the first is Alexandria by Paul Kingsnorth. Now, I read his novel Beast, which is very short, very impactful novel, and his debut book was called The Wake, which I haven't read yet, but heard really great things about, but it's meant to be a very challenging book. So this novel takes place 1,000 years in the future, where I think the rest of humanity has been wiped out except for one small religious community. And in this religious community, they feel a presence is sort of stalking them and threatening them. And yeah, and Paul Kingsnorth is very good at writing this very unsettling atmosphere of because Beast was sort of in the same way of someone who is being stalked, and he explores lots of existential questions and philosophical questions, and but in a way that's really meaningful and impactful. And yeah, so I'm very keen to read this next novel of his. And then I have the second novel from Sophie Mackintosh called Blue Ticket. Her debut novel was called The Water Cure. It came out a couple of years ago and was longlisted for the Booker Prize. I absolutely loved it. It was a feminist dystopian novel. I know it was sort of contentious. Not everybody felt the same way, but yeah, I thought it was so powerful and a really different kind of dystopian novel. And as this sounds like a very different kind of dystopian novel too. So it's at a point where women, when they come of age, when they get their first periods, they have to go get a lottery ticket, and they get either a white ticket or a blue ticket. And one ticket means that they have to have children, and then the other ticket means that they are granted their freedom. And so yeah, it's about this issue of choice and motherhood. And yeah, and I think I think some people will like roll their eyes when they hear like feminist dystopia. They'll think that sort of like Margaret Atwood and that it's all been done before. But I think she gives a really interesting, different perspective, making some surprising insights in the way that she writes. So yeah, very, very much looking forward to this. So those are all the books that I want to talk about. Let me know if you've read any of these, or if you're keen to read any of these. Let me know down in the comments below, and we can have a chat. And I hope you're doing well. I hope time is progressing at the pace that you want it to. And I'll speak to you again soon. Bye, everyone.